Welcome to People Love Process. In this movie, we're going to use Adobe Illustrator as a staging ground to compose an organic texturized design. But first, we need to create a texture resource we can use in our design. So we're going to first start the process in Adobe Photoshop first. This is going to be a fun one, so let's dive into it. Here's a photograph. I captured this on the Oregon coast. We were by the waterfront on a dock with boats around it. And this was a piling that I saw, but it was the texture that attracted me to it. I'm like, my wife gets highly annoyed at me sometimes because instead of paying attention to whatever the attraction is we're there to see, I'm like freaking out over something cool like this that I know I could use in a creative project. In this case, the surface texture on this piling just blew me away. You know, it's not a man-made texture, other than the fact that, you know, there's people operating boats that bumped into this piling and whatever interacted with it, with all the scrapes and that kind of stuff and the weather, and just over time created this amazing texture. So I took out my iPhone, took a picture of it, and we're going to turn it into a texture resource. Now, this is, of course, an RGB color format image. And the first thing I usually do is I just go to adjust and brightness and contrast just to improve the contrast of the image. I won't leave it in RGB. We're going to convert it to a grayscale because from that point I do other adjustments. But I don't want to blow it out too far because then you get rid of all that nice texture. So I just want to brighten it a little bit, and just to improve the contrast. So when we convert it to grayscale, there's not a ton of midtones into it. So something like that, that's good enough. We click OK, and then we'll change the mode from RGB. We'll go to grayscale, and then this is where I'll start playing. And I'm not even going to use adjustment layers. So technically they call that non-destructive. I don't consider what I'm doing destructive. It's just I have no reason to go back to what I previously had. So we're going to go adjustments. We'll go levels. This is what you had to do in the old days before adjustment layers, where you had to commit to the process and you'd save at every iterative stage because you didn't know if you're going to like what you're going to change. But this is where I'll just further adjust it, and I'm going to blow it out a bit on the right side by pulling that in. I don't want to go too far. Let's go ahead and adjust this. So I'll bring this over, something like that, and then so I'm just trying to blow out the image. Bring this all the way over. Something like that. So I'm trying to work out. We're going to end up turning this into what's called a bitmap TIFF image. Now, a bitmap TIFF only has black pixels and white pixels. And when you bring a bitmap TIFF image into Illustrator, white becomes transparent, and those black pixels you can colorize to whatever color you want. So it works great for texturizing a design. So there's not going to be any transparent pixels in this, and I'll show you that. I think that looks that actually looks pretty good. So I'm going to go with that and click OK. And now if I zoom in, what you're going to see, because we're in grayscale, is you'll see some transparent pixels in there. Those are ultimately, it's going to find the average between the black pixels and the lightest transparent pixels, and it's going to average it, and we're going to create just a black pixel, white pixel image. Let's go ahead and click out of this and go to mode. We're going to go to bitmap. So we want to convert from grayscale to bitmap. It'll open up this window. You can see our input resolution is 400. We want to retain that. So I'll put 400 there. And then the method we want to use, we're not doing a diffusion dither. That's cool, by the way, but we're going to be doing 50% threshold. So again, it's going to find that threshold between the darkest black and the lightest pixel that would be a transparent pixel, a grayish type of pixel. And we'll click OK, and it's not going to look like anything changed after we click OK. But if we zoom in now, you can see there are no transparent pixels. It's just black pixels and white pixels, and that's what we want. So we zoom out, and this is where you want to save it. So we'll go Save As. I'll go Desktop, and we want the format to be a TIFF, and we're going to call this Awesome Crud because it's a texture and it's awesome. And we're going to click Save. I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to click Mac and None. Okay, so we've saved that onto our desktop. So let's go ahead and jump over to Adobe Illustrator, and I'll continue walking through this process. So we'll just switch to Illustrator. And the image you see here, this is our inspiration for today. Now, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and about 7 or 8 miles from where I lived, there was this awesome nature trail called the McLean Nature Trail. And this is a photograph from that same nature trail. I took this a couple years ago, but they have these great walkways. This one's a dock. You can just go out and it puts you in the middle of the pond. You can look around. But these are walkways that go over areas of the pond, and then it meanders into the woods, up into the hills, and goes all the way around. You come out over here. There's a beaver dam over in this area. So just a lot of really cool stuff. I love growing up. We would ride our BMX bikes. That should give you an idea of what timeline this was. And we'd ride all the way over. And by the way, you know, I always find those memes online hilarious about 80s kids, like their parents didn't know where they were at. That's totally me. Like I'd be gone all day with a couple of my friends. We'd be at McLean Nature Trail. We were catching salamanders by leaning over the edge of like a dock like this. We'd see them in the water and grab them and stuff. So it was just fun. So this is our inspiration. This is what I want to create a design of. And it all starts with drawing. So this is my initial rough sketch of what I want to do. I'm kind of thinking of that nature trail that goes into the woods up by the hills and through the forest. But then those docks, this is representing those wooden platforms that in areas you're walking over the water. Here's the water. There's fish in the water, perch. There's some bass. There's salamanders. But also all the flora around it, you know, and of course it's a nice day, so we put a sun. Now, the drawing process is progressive. Start off rough, don't worry about exact shape and form, and then use that to draw on top of to figure out exact shape and form. And that's all I did here to improve the drawing, to kind of remove that guesswork of what shapes do I need to build. These are all simple shapes to build in Adobe Illustrator because a lot of them are geometric. The only one that was maybe a little more trickier was the salamander, just because of their feet. Those are pretty organic shapes, but not hard. So this is where it starts. It starts with the sketch, and like every design I work on, I place it on its own layer, adjust the opacity, in this case to 20%, lock the layer, and just build out all my vector shapes. Now, I try to build in pieces. It just makes life a lot easier. What do I mean by that? Well, let's zoom in on this part right here. So it was easy to build a branch, then it was easy to build one leaf and then copy it, size it a little bit, position it differently. That way I can just select all these shapes, all these leaves, and the branch like this, and I can just go to Pathfinder and go Unite. So it's easier to create in pieces and then unite them into one unified shape. It goes a lot faster. If you tried to build this point, do this, do that, well, this line for the stem wouldn't necessarily line up exactly, and it wouldn't look as nice. So it's always easier to build in pieces, select them, unite them like that. Same thing with other areas like this. This is just going to be a one-color design. So that means this shape is going to be on top of this shape, And that means it's going to knock through it. Oops. Make sure it's on the right layer or on top of the shape. So this on top of this shape. And by the way, let's just do this to make it easier. I'll select these two shapes. We'll just add a fill to them. So you can see this one's on top. So you just want to make sure it's behind the shapes it needs to be, like that. Then we can just take shapes like this, use Pathfinder, minus front, take this shape, minus front. And that's all I'm going to do is go through all these areas and just fuse them together. Like ultimately this will fuse with the path like this. These will knock out of that path to imply that wooden platform you walk on. Here's the salamander. And you can see how I handled these curves. This is, in my opinion, the easiest way to do a curve is you get to this point and don't worry about placing an anchor right here. That overcomplicates it. Just go to the next one, pull out this handle so it's a curved handle, and then control this curve with the handles. It makes it a lot easier. And of course, as I'm creating the body, it's easier to create the body. And then to get these, I just use these shapes, which are elliptical shapes. And ultimately, I'm just going to unite them like this. And that will become the fill. I can take this design. Do salamanders actually have a zigzag? No, I just thought it looked kind of cool, and we added it to our art. So that's all the base art is. Simple shapes, built in pieces, united together using Pathfinder. So what I end up with is a nice black and white image like this. It's all one compound path. So if you look at the appearance panel, it's one compound. Now, the thing with vector art, all vector art, is that when you build with the tools and geometric methods in Illustrator, you're going to get dagger sharp points. So this is where I like to go in, and you can use the corner widget in Adobe Illustrator. The only difference between that and a plugin I use called Dynamic Corners by Astute Graphics is that with Illustrator, you have to select the anchors first before you get the rounding controls. In my opinion, this was a huge mistake for Illustrator to integrate it this way. It should be a smart tool where you don't have to select anything. You just hover over it. But this is the way they integrate. They don't actually use their software, so they don't know better. Why do I say this is the wrong way to integrate this? Because if you're not zoomed in, you can accidentally trigger the corner widget. I mean, usually when I'm doing a workshop live with a group of people, I won't be zoomed in. I'll be like this, and I'm trying to select a corner or do something, and I accidentally round something. And then I ask the audience, hey, did you ever do this? And explain that you accidentally round it. And sometimes you don't notice right away, and you come to it later and you're like, what? How'd that get rounded? I didn't want that, Everybody puts their hand up. Well, that just shows me it could have been executed better. It could have been implemented better, I should say, by Adobe. I really love Astute Graphics methodology. But bottom line, you want to round off these sharp vertices in your artwork because it gives things a better look. So if we're going to use the corner widget, and by the way, even though I show plugins, I only show them when there's an equivalent feature in Adobe Illustrator. Well, most of the time. Sometimes Adobe just doesn't have something that is going to make life a lot easier, so I'll use it anyway. But you have to pre-select and figure out that. Well, I might like that, but now I want this to be exactly the same. Well, how do I get that feature onto this point? Well, I can go over here. Well, that just selects that. So how do I check that? Well, that's the thing where their feature is limited. You can't. That's why I go to Astute Graphics Dynamic Corners, part of their Vector Scribe plugin, because I can hover over around and it tells me what that corner radius is. It's 0.346. If I like that, I can click it. Doesn't matter that it was created with Adobe Illustrator's corner widget. And then I can go to this one and apply that round to this one. So this is why I prefer Astute's rounding, because once I figure out a tolerance of rounding for like certain vertices, then I'll just go to other ones and I'll just click on them and just add them like this to this tree shape. And it just makes life a lot easier and it goes a lot faster. And that's pretty fine detail. Is anybody going to notice that? Well, it's not about what people notice. It's about what looks better. And they may never zoom in this far, but I do. And I'm the creative, so I'm going to make the decision to improve the art, regardless if some people don't pay that much attention and never notice it. That's the difference between craftsmanship and kind of having that attitude when it comes to design or illustration of, it's good enough. It's like, go the extra effort. If you know it would improve it by doing it, then guess what? You should do it. So that's the difference between this art. Let's zoom in here. So here is non-rounded. Here's rounded. So just look how those subtle changes happen, whether it's on the edge of the trees or the edge of the leaf, non-rounded and rounded. So just adding that little bit of rounding on all the shapes. And by the way, this is still one compound path unified shape as shown here in the appearance panel. So that's what we want to do. Now we have a tonal family we're going to use. This is our tonal family. And unfortunately, my drag and drop swatches will probably never come to Illustrator. Oh, that just still frustrates me so much. Okay. But we're going to color this base artwork one of these specific colors, specifically this third color down here, because this is going to be the undertone for our entire design. Everything we're going to do on top of this will be colorizing placed bitmap texture images. And there's going to be four types, kind of four categories of texture types we're going to be using. And so the first one is splatters. So we're going to be utilizing splatters. All of these I created well over a decade ago. I'm still using them. And it's also a good argument for having a flatbed scanner, because once I create this, these were just India ink dropped on white paper, or I went ahead and splattered it to get these directional splatters. Here's another splatter. Here's another splatter. And then I scanned it in using a flatbed scanner. And here's another one I created. I created a little brush in Photoshop and just kind of stamped out these little speckly kind of blobs. Here's another one where it's a surface texture. This is one where I just took acrylic paint. And I actually, what you see is white here, not the black, but what you see is the white area. That was actually the paint that I painted on paper, and then I scanned it in. Black was the color of the paint, and then I inversed it in Photoshop and created this texture from it. So this is a surface texture we'll be using. You saw the texture a resource we'll also be using that I created in Photoshop. And by the way, once I create anything outside the computer in analog using ink, or I'll be using a speckle texture that I created with an old toothbrush. So instead of throwing an old toothbrush away, just clean it a little bit and then use it to dip it into ink and get splatter effects or little flecks of ink. Those make great textures. I'm going to show you one of those coming up. But all of these you can just scan into your flatbed scanner. And this is what I did with my old scanner. I don't even have anymore. I wore it out. But this one I've had for about 9 years now. So they last a long time. They're very inexpensive. But if you scan in at like 800 ppi, you'll be able to use that for years. I mean, you can use it for your whole career as a texture resource, because textures are timeless. That's the best thing about them. They never go out of style. So enough about textures. Why do I use bitmap TIFF images? I get asked this every time I do something where I show utilizing textures. Well, here's why. And just so I forget, by the way, if we click onto this name, notice raster 246 kilobytes. This is this placed image here on the left. It's a pixel image, but it's only 246 kilobytes. That's like nothing. The one on the right, this is vector based, it's 8.2 megabytes. So this one is a bitmap TIFF. If I zoom in on it, let's go ahead and switch to the zoom tool, and I zoom in on it here. I'm at nearly 1,233%. This is way bigger than I'm ever going to use it. But this, you can see, it's just black pixels and white pixels. And that's what we want. It's a bitmap TIFF. And the flexibility of a bitmap TIFF is you can colorize it any way you want. So if I select this and colorize it, oops, not a stroke, but a fill. Notice he'll say there's no fill on this. It'll just default to the black. But I can fill this with any color I want. I can apply blend modes to it. It's just limitless how you can use it. And of course, if you say no color, it just defaults to the black. But look at how authentic. If you look in the dark areas of this design, you see all this flecking here. Like specifically in this area, these little flecks. That's great detail. I'm at 643% zoom, still a lot larger than you're ever going to see it. But as you go out, it just looks more authentic. If we go over to this one, to that same area here, you see a little bit of flecking, but look at how unnatural and just image traced it looked. This is why I don't like image tracing. Not only that, it's an ungodly amount of anchor points. If I select this, you almost can't even see the art. Now, of course, you can turn off anchor point display by going Command H like that. But still, when you zoom in, it just looks really authentic. And if I select this and I go over here, it has over 125,000 anchor points. That's why it's 8.2 megabytes. This is only 200 and what was it, 46 kilobytes? That's nuts. That's like a simple text file in terms of the weight. So, and it works a lot better. It looks a lot more authentic, and that's what I care about. So I don't care about vector textures. I just think it will bloat the creative process. So I don't use them. So let's turn that off. I just want to walk through that. Let's turn our base coloring back on here. And we're going to do the first texture. And the first texture we're going to be focusing on are these splatter textures. So I love the way this one came out, just like moving it slowly and it kind of gets all stringy. So that's kind of a fun one. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this one over. And by the way, this, I should point out right now I have Smart Guides turned on. Notice how it says you're over an anchor, I'm over a path. You'll want to turn off or toggle off Smart Guides, and you do that by just going Command U. That way, it won't want to snap, and it makes positioning these a lot easier. They don't snap to edges and stuff. You don't want that. So I'm just going to bring it over here, and I think I'm going to go ahead and rotate it a bit, kind of like that, and position it. We'll rotate it a little more, I think. Something like this. That looks pretty good. And then on this one, I'm going to color this one. We have our colors here. I think I'm going to color this one. Maybe that color. You don't obviously want to color it the same as the background. We're not going to be using that background color except for the background. And then on this one up here, I'll just bring this one in, and we're just going to position it over the area at the top. I just want it to kind of add some nice speckling, splattering kind of texture running into the design. And on this one, we'll do that color. That looks good. Now, all of these, I'm going to be composing over the background image. And to kind of help guide me as I'm going along, I have this layer called Blocker. If I turn that on, you can see all I've done is I've created a mask. In this case, I colored it so you'd see what it is. But if I select that and just color it white, that's all it is just to show us what those textures are doing as they're interacting within the art, because ultimately I can mask this into a shape, but to compose it, it makes it a lot easier if I can just see it and then adjust it without having to deal with the mask. So I'll be toggling this blocker layer off and on just to preview. So as we're working, since we're placing textures, I'll just go ahead and I'll lock the layer that those textures are on so I don't accidentally select it. Here's some more where we have textures applied. These are the splatter textures, of course. And I'm going to bring this guy in here, bring him over, kind of like that, maybe. All these, I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to colorize all of these kind of the bluish color or the green color. I'm not sure. This one, we're going to rotate this. So something like that, maybe. Bring it over. That's kind of weird. And I just noticed as you're rotating it, the texture underneath is flickering. That's weird. By the way, some of these might line out. And if that's the case, just go to View and click on View CPU, and it'll resolve any redraw. Oh, actually, let's try that because I want to see if it still flickers when I rotate it over it. Oh, see, okay. It's the redraw thing that was freaking it out. That's interesting. I've never noticed that. Okay. So on these ones, I think here, we'll color it like that. I'll take these, color it like that. It's looking good. I'll go ahead and lock that. Let's do the next one. This one here. I'll select these. We'll color it like that. Let's check the blocker. Ooh, I like that. I like, yeah. That's looking good. Let's go and lock that. We'll go on this one. All of these. You know, now that I'm looking at it, I like that one, but I'm going to try a different color on these. Yeah, I think I'm going to change those to blue instead. This is where, you know, there's experimentation. I definitely need to work some green into it, though. So maybe on these ones. Let's color those the dark green. And turn on this blocker. Yeah, I like that green being worked into it. Maybe not. See, now I'm second guessing myself. Let's try something. I think it's a little too dark. Let's try that. Maybe this one we'll just put kind of over like that. Check out what it looks like. Okay. Now I'm changing my mind again. I'm going to go back to this one. I'm going to add green there, and on this one, add green. So it's only after adding some that, you know, it makes me change my mind in terms of coloring. I think we'll do this one as well. And I think we add one up here. Yeah. Okay, now that I look at it with the lighter color on top, I think that is the way to go. So you're going to have to play around with stuff. Let's check that. Oh, yeah, that's way better. Okay, I should have kept green there. I had the right idea, but then I second guessed myself. Now, here's the one thing about using texture resources. Here's the one that I painted on paper, scanned it in with my flatbed scanner, brought into Photoshop, inverted it so what was black became white background. This is a bitmap TIFF now. But this is how I'll position it. Now, this was 8.5 by 11 vertically, but I want to use it in a horizontal type format here, going this way. And this is the flexibility of utilizing a pattern like that, is that because it's a texture, you don't have to worry about distorting it. A pattern's already distressed, so it's not going to be bad if you decide to distort it. So if I take this image and I just increase it widthwise like this and drag it over as far as I want over to the right like that, yeah, I've distorted it, but it's not really going to matter in terms of the texture itself. I think it's going to look right. Oh, did I do that? Just a minute. Am I on the right? Okay. God, I thought I was on this side and go, what? Am I distorting this? Okay, I'm on this layer. Okay, so once I've done this one, I'm going to turn to white, and you can see how it knocks through everything. Well, I don't want it to be 100% opaque, so I'm going to go to opacity. I'm going to knock it down to 35. That way, if we zoom in here, you can see how it's running through other textures. So if I turn this off, without, with, and it creates a nice kind of layer to it. And if we check it with the blocker, I think that, oh, that's looking really cool. We're going to lock it. Now, let's use the texture we created in Photoshop. The awesome Crud one, this is it right here. It's a bitmap TIFF, of course, so we're going to go ahead and color it. On this one, I could use this bluish color in our tonal family and put it in like that. And then I can go to blend mode and I can go multiply. Let's zoom in on that just so I can show you what it's doing. So if I turn this layer off without it, and then as it runs over the texture, it's changing those colors. But as I play around, like with most people that use any of the blend modes, whether in Photoshop or Illustrator, I'm not sure why all the blend modes, like Vibrant, isn't in Illustrator, but it'd be nice because that's one of my favorite ones in Photoshop. Right now we're using multiply, so we'll go to transparency. And I'm going to go to hard light because I just like the way it looks. So let's zoom over an area and I turn it off. It's easier to see when you see it without it, and then you add it. I like it because it gets that nice bright blue in only certain areas. And I think that looks really cool. So let's zoom out. I'm going to turn on the blocker. So without it, with it, I think that looks kind of cool. Maybe we adjust the opacity. Maybe it's a little too intense. I think it's at 100. Yeah, it's at 100%. So we'll knock this down to, we'll knock off 25 to 75. And I think that looks fine. Turn on the blocker. That looks great. And the last texture we're going to do, and this one was made with the old toothbrush where I flicked it at paper with India ink like this. And these work great over the top of a design like this. And in this case, I'm going to colorize this green like that. Let's zoom in. Let's lock these layers. Let's go ahead and zoom in now. And so you can see all the texturing running through the design like this, giving it a nice layered kind of look. We have the little specks that fall outside of that. I think that looks great. And of course, type like this. Now, I wouldn't give this file as is to a client if they wanted to use this for, let's say they're going to print up a poster or whatever for tourism promotion. I would save out like a rasterized TIFF image of this design at a very high resolution and provide that, so nothing would be hard to use in terms of reproducing it. Now, it's on this design that I'm just using the blocker to block everything. So if I turn that off, here's the mess that's just sitting on top of everything. So what I could do is I could go ahead and unlock all these layers. I'll go ahead and lock this layer, which is the base color. So with all these layers unlocked, I'm not going to include the specks. I want that to sit on top still and go outside of the area. We're going to use a mask here. And I'm just going to go Command A. That will select all those image files. The mask is on the top layer above all of them. We don't need the type either. And this is where I'll just mask it. Illustrator will warn you, well, this is a pretty complex mask. Okay, this is 2025. I think you can deal with it. And we'll mask it like that. So all of those are now within a mask. I would still keep my surface texture on top like that. And of course, the type underneath. So textures are just so much fun to work with. I just love the authenticity of them because they are derived from surfaces and methodology that's completely random and often like the one we created in Photoshop, based off of nature interacting with something man has made. In this case, a piling that was painted and it got worn out and distressed and it just looks beautiful. And it's just funny that a texture, which is kind of the victim of the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, everything decays, is something that you can turn around and use in a creative way to beautify it. That's kind of the irony with textures, but it's the part that I really love about using textures in design and illustration. I love where I grew up, and the McLean Nature Trail is exactly the same as I remember it. I went there a couple years ago, and nothing's changed, and that was kind of cool because that's not always true about everywhere you go. I hope you enjoyed this content as much as I did creating it. I love using textures, and I encourage you to capture something on your own with your iPhone or your Android and try creating a texture resource yourself. Warning, it's very addictive. I've been texture exploring since art school. When we had a photography class in art school and we had to pick a theme, and I decided to sneak into an old abandoned hotel in downtown Seattle and started taking textures. I had no idea what I was doing. I just thought, oh, that kind of looks cool. And I've never looked back. I've been using textures ever since. All the textures I use in this design are in the exercise files for this movie, which you can find access to in the description below this movie. Doing so helps support this channel, and I thank you because it practically helps me to invest the time necessary to create new content. So it's very much appreciated when you do that. Until next time, thank you for watching People of Process. And as always, I hope this type of creative content helps you to improve your own creative process.